Good evening, everyone. My name is Sam Nasser, and this is the Azure Cleveland User Group. A little bit about the group. We meet typically every second Wednesday of the month. The meetings are free of charge and open to the public, and we cover a variety of topics related to Azure, whether it's infrastructure as a service, platform, or software as a service. You can find meeting information posted on meetup.com at the link listed at the bottom of the slide for both past as well as upcoming meetings. Always like to give a big thank you to our sponsors, PostSharp and DevExpress, for sponsoring the post-meeting prizes that'll be handed out using the eval forms. And also like to thank the .NET Foundation for sponsoring the Meetup site, and NIS Technologies for sponsoring the virtual meeting space. Another big thank you to Manning.com for offering a 35% off offer on a specific set of books that's available at the link listed at the bottom of the slide, with the discount code MTPCLEC21. The link as well as the discount code will be shared in chat a little bit later. And some general information. First and foremost, please keep in mind participation is encouraged. And like I always say, the only stupid question is the one not being asked. So feel free to jump in with any questions or comments. However, when not speaking, kindly ask you to mute your microphones just to avoid any background noise. And we'd like to keep it casual but organized, so you don't necessarily have to wait for the speaker to pause for questions or at the very end of the session, but you can jump in at any point in time with a question. However, we want to give our speaker enough time to go through the demos and the slides within the presentation. Lastly, the presentation is being recorded and will be posted on YouTube in just a few short days, and the link will also be shared in chat as well. So for tonight's feature presentation, we have Azure Application Insights, DevOps, and Continuous Monitoring by Randy Pagels. Randy is a cloud solution architect and developer advocate for using Microsoft Azure. He likes to provide education so that developers can better understand the benefits of using the cloud, as well as best practices for application modernization. And so with that, let me turn it over to Randy and make you presenter.
Yep, I'll go ahead and share my screen. All right, let me know when people can see this. Here we go. I think you can see it, right, Sam? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, so hello everyone and good evening and thank you for joining. As Sam said, keep it casual. I have a, if you have questions, just chime in and ask the questions, or IM or whatnot. We can even have some time at the end. My hope tonight is just to go through and show you some about Azure Monitor and Application Insights, and keep it a little fun and casual. So again, just hopefully teach you a couple things about Azure and monitoring. Anyway, my name's Randy Pagels. I'm a DevOps architect now. As Sam said, I formerly worked at Microsoft for 17 years as a cloud solution architect. I still, I'm working now for, we call it Xperid. Xperid is a new partner and basically almost a year old now in the US. And they are a team of experts that focus on Azure technology, application modernization technologies, DevOps technologies. So kind of a focus, a really honed in focus on that. The company was founded in Netherlands, and then we have a US kind of base presence is where I am today. So we can talk more about that as well at the end. I believe you said, Sam, so anybody interested in pursuing that, let me know. So tonight we're going to talk about, again, application insights. So let's kind of get going on some of these things. So what is DevOps? I just talk about DevOps. I do talk about DevOps a lot. That's kind of my core competency for work. And DevOps is really, this is the definition, right? The union of people, process, and products. If you've ever heard Donovan Brown talk, this is exactly what he talks about. He's talking about end users. He's talking about value. And in a nutshell, DevOps is all about continuous delivery of value. It's not code. It's not how many times you can deploy, features. If they're not used, there's no value. There's no DevOps. So it's very important to keep this going. Tonight's talk is a little blended with DevOps and this idea in the right-hand side of continuous delivery. So the idea here is there's no, someone's saying there's no slides. Anybody else see the slides okay? I'm actually sharing my screen and hopefully, can anybody verify? Oh, there it goes. Okay, cool. Thanks, Ed. All right. The idea is, again, whether you're planning your work, developing, coding, testing, deploying, operating, and then monitoring it. And key is this continuous delivery of value here is key is to monitoring your application. And we're going to go through what that looks like and what that means. Hopefully at the end, we can have a little fun with that. So related to continuous monitoring your application, once you deploy it, how do you know you delivered value? You monitor it to know if you delivered value. And my backdrop tonight is going to be Azure Services. And Azure Services has, I want to kind of break that down and talk about what that means. Some of the DevOps services, if you haven't used those are free for the first 5 users. If you haven't tried that out, you can sign up for a free account. It's just called dev.azure.com. And these are some of the services that we talk about. And it's not a deep dive into Azure DevOps, but again, I talk about it a lot. Happy to have that conversation with you. So just chime in or whatnot. But DevOps is made up of components. Microsoft uses DevOps they use it for Windows 11, they use it for Bing, they use it for Minecraft, Office 365. They build DevOps with DevOps. So just to be clear, this is it's a SaaS service, lives on Azure, fully secured. Again, Windows 11 source code is inside of this in the cloud. So just wanted to kind of make a point of that. Azure Boards is all about project management. There's repos for, kind of Git repos for storing code, a lot of different branch policies you can put on those things. And Azure Pipelines is the automation that goes behind build and deploy, testing, et cetera, whatever you're going to do or monitor, as a matter of fact. I say that the Azure Pipelines is the heart and soul of this. Now, if you're using GitHub or you're a GitHub user, of course, Microsoft owns GitHub as well, and there's some comparable tools. It's not completely in parity with Azure DevOps. Again, we can talk later about that, but just know that there are DevOps type style processes you can put in place if you're using GitHub. Now about Azure Monitor. The goal with Azure Monitor is to provide end-to-end monitoring in your application. And to accomplish that, we provide a common backend and analytic platform that's built into Azure and all the Azure services, as a matter of fact. So what that means is out of the box, you get real-time monitoring of data that's all collected and consolidated into a single platform under unified monitoring. So what the next thing you can do is take the center here is take the data-driven insights. So now we can do some advanced diagnostics across those insights, whether it's an application code, whether it's a service or a virtual machine, it doesn't matter. You can actually slice and dice that data up to get some really intelligent reports out of it as well. There's all such things as workflow integrations. DevOps is one of those workflow integrations I'm going to show you. I'll probably show it to you on the slide because I was having a little difficulty getting it working earlier, but we'll talk through what it was supposed to do. So that's Azure Monitor at a super high level. Just take another double click down here. This is what it looks like, the unified monitoring. Again, this lives in Azure, and I can monitor, any application you deploy out to Azure, the operating system it's running on, if it's in a virtual machine or if it's in a service itself, the resources that's used by subscription and by tenant. And that data is collected and dumped into the database called metrics and the log files. And with that, you can get a lot of different things out of it, right? So a couple insights we're going to talk about is the application insights, which is at the very top. And I have a .NET C# application that's deployed. We'll look at that for my backdrop. But on top of that, if you're deploying into a container, just know that application insights can also monitor the apps running in containers, running on a virtual machine. We can take that data, and through the portal, you can actually visualize that data on dashboards. I'll give you a demo of that. Different views, you can actually dump it to Power BI if you wanted to slice and dice it that way. There's some canned built-in workbooks as part of the product, and Those are for maybe look at, show me my top failures, or show me my 3 slowest performing parts of the app, or maybe show me all the different exceptions I might have gotten within a time window. These workbooks are pretty cool for that, for writing reports. And then there's the metrics analyzer and the metrics explorer and log analytics, where you can kind of just think of that as double clicking into the data. You can write queries, they're called Cusco queries, to pull that data out of the log analytics and present them in the metrics kind of a dashboard. What's nice too is if you like what you see, you can actually pin that widget to the Azure dashboard. So I'll be sure to show that to you. Now with all that, you want to set up alerts. You can actually have alerts that say, hey, if my app is running hot, 80% maybe the CPU is just too hot or it's being used too much, you can actually have a auto scaling up to respond to that alert. So it's all automatic. It can scale up, of course. There's always, you incur a little cost when that happens, but then the nice thing is it scales back down when you're done. So that's all part of the response of the alert. And the last thing it can do is integrate through, generally speaking, it passes messages back and forth, but it can integrate into like event hubs or event grid, or even maybe service bus or whatnot. So there's some APIs that are there. So as I said, this is sort of what it looks like, the one metrics, the unified monitoring with alerts inside of the Azure portal. It's called Monitor. You just kind of look up Monitor, you'll find this. And it's just integrated right into the product. So there's nothing else to install or whatnot. And that's what I'm going to kind of show you some of this. You get some full stack into the resource group. So this is another thing, if you took a step back, generally speaking, a resource group in Azure is a logical container for your application or applications. And monitoring, you can wrap your arms around all the different resources that live inside of a resource group. So the monitoring piece will give you some health of the app itself, health of the services that the app is running on, fire alerts on it. Maybe you're running containers or running an app service or something. You can set up those alerts there as well. And what's really slick is you can actually jump right into an application map, which to me is my favorite part of Application Insights, is the map itself, which you can just get so much information from. It's just think of it as a diving board into where you want to go. I put this into the slide deck because I'm going to share this with Sam, and you can post it wherever you like. But when we go, I'm going to show you some live demos of this, but I thought later you won't have the live demo, so it's a screenshot. So this end-to-end diagnostics of Application Insights will allow you to look at this application, data flow, call flow, dependencies. So if you're dependent on let's say a database or a message queue, it will show you those. If you're running .NET apps, you should know .NET swallows errors. Application Insights will catch those errors and present them here as well in this dashboard. But it monitors things like .NET, JavaScript, Java, Node.js, different operating systems. There's a SDK you can actually install to monitor different style apps, whether it's a client app or whether it's a app service or whatnot. And the other thing, if you're using like a .NET, like Microsoft Technologies and .NET Framework or .NET Technologies, you can actually install snapshot debugging and profiling. So if you're used to Visual Studio Enterprise has those features where you can actually profile an application and really do timings on how long method calls take and what's the call stack and what's the hot path inside of an application. That's built into Application Insights. Same thing with snapshot debugging, right? You normally don't want to take a pulse on a production running app because it's going to take a hit. With snapshot debugging, you can actually go in and if there's a problem, right? You only do this if there's a problem. You go in and say, hey, I want a snapshot debugging from this time, or turn it on until you hit a bug and then turn it back off. So what's nice about that is you get this file, you can actually pull back into Visual Studio and start analyzing it. So keep that in mind as well. Integration with monitoring, these different CM tools here. So I won't list them all, but there's a few. Splunk is pretty popular out there. Prometheus is out there as well. New Relic, Dynatrace. So just keep in mind you can export data from Application Insights into these other tools if you're a fan of these other tools as well. Datadog is another popular one. So the tool provides that. So now we're kind of going down into just the Application Insights itself, which again is a piece of Azure Monitor. But think of the big picture here. You can create a dashboard for your application. You get this visibility into the app itself and how it's running, sending alerts, grabbing notifications, gives you a chance to visualize everything about the application. That's where I'd start. And then you can get some insights. So how many times, any kind of failures or exceptions you might get, right? How do you detect those? How do you set up alerts for those? How you diagnose those errors, exceptions, etc. Any one of these is a deep link into that area of application insights. And then an integration here as well. I'm going to show you, or at least talk about the integrations to DevOps pipelines or Azure or GitHub pipelines, and what that means for integration into continuous monitoring. And then monitoring, we talked about that again. You're doing websites or whatnot as well. So, and these tools live if you're using Visual Studio Code. Great IDE. There's a great extension you can use for this, and then I'm going to show it to you in Visual Studio as well. Same extension, kind of all works. I'll just talk highly about the ecosystem here. So application insights, if you think about the ingestion part of it, how do I get my data? Application, so depending on how you're building your app, if it's an older app or JavaScript app or whatnot, there's an SDK you can actually install. I'll show you how easy that is to put into your application. If you're building a web service, let's say an app service, and that's your platform of choice, because of the integration with the DevTools and Azure, it just inserts itself into application insights. You don't have to do a thing. Just it knows that it wants to monitor it because it's an application insert or application service in Azure. If it's an SDK, let's say running on a VM, and maybe even the VM's behind a firewall or whatnot, you can install an SDK on that VM, and that SDK will wire itself up to Azure. Now the VM must see the internet because application insights only runs in the cloud. So keep that in mind. And then as far as taking that data and exploring around in the center here, right? Azure Portal, that's probably the most common tool is the Azure Portal itself to build dashboards. There's Azure Monitor, there's application maps. Live stream is pretty cool. You can actually watch the app in a live mode. And then you can also, which again, as a developer heads down, you can pull that data right into Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code and look at it there. So that's another nice feature that they have. And then as far as like looking at it from other places, like Power BI was pretty popular, or Stream Analytics, maybe even Azure DevOps, there's an export and correlation feature of application insights. Basically, you flip a switch and say, hey, I want to start dumping this data into one of these tools, and you just pick the tool and it'll go ahead and start exporting that data. This slide's probably ever so slightly outdated, but as far as like some of the support on the cloud here, C#, VB.NET, JavaScript, Node.js, Python, Ruby, those are all pretty commonly supported. And then the frameworks themselves, right? .NET Core, we don't really say, I guess we don't say .NET Core anymore, we just say .NET, .NET 7, .NET 8's coming out, mobile apps, Docker and containers and whatnot here. Azure Functions, Azure Logic Apps, those are all supported as well. And then logging frameworks, iLogger, Log4j, Log4net, they're all here as far as turning those loggers on as well. What's probably not obvious here, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, is you can actually, out of the box, probably 80% of what you'd look for is already gathered. You can also just keep in mind, if you have something very specific to your application that you want to catch or log, collect telemetry on, you can actually insert custom data points. So you can collect custom telemetry about the app. I'll sort of show you a part about that, which would be cool to see. I'll watch my time here too. So again, this is talking about the SDK, instrumenting the application itself, deployed app. Again, I deploy an app service or a function or a logic app, maybe an app on a virtual machine. Azure, because it's built in, already knows how to monitor these things. You don't have to do a thing. If these other apps, you're using these, the bottom piece here, you'll have to install an SDK. Just keep that in mind. So depending on here, you're going to go do this. Now, I did not update the slide on the prices, even though my estimate based on my usage was about really close to this. But usually someone asks me, well, what does this cost, right? It all depends on how much you want to ingest data-wise and how big the app is and how much use it's going to have. So it's hard to say. There is a pricing calculator on Azure. You can actually go play around and look. But do know this, you can actually collect, there's 3 different ways to set this. Active sampling is, it adjusts automatically to the volume of data coming in, and it's kind of the default sampling. It's collecting everything, and it's probably the most expensive point. The other one is fixed rate, so I can say throttle it back, look at every other transaction, look at every other piece of telemetry, let's say 50%. and there's a slider on that. So if you want to just kind of get a pulse on your app, you could just crank that down a little bit. And then the ingest and sampling is how much data do you want? I could say in this example, I could say 5 gig. Oh, I'm going on the wrong side. I could say I want to collect 5 gig and I want an alert at 4 gig, right? And cap it. You could cap these alerts and it won't go any further. And then of course, retention, you pay for retention because it's all storage and data, storage in Azure. So you have control over these areas, just keep that in mind. The continuous monitoring phase, this is through the build and test, of course. You'll want to, this is natively, by the way, in Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code, is looking at that data from the IDE. And I mentioned that when your head's down, you can pull that data down. Production telemetries and like CodeLens is part of built in. If you've seen CodeLens above method calls, debugging sessions, you can pull that debug session down right off of Azure where the app's running. You can create synthetic tests. So now we can ping those endpoints, make sure that app has a heartbeat. I can pull that data back into Visual Studio as well. I can get that data through load testing. And then what's another nice thing I thought was cool was integration into, hey, I'm in the portal, I'm a developer, my apps blew up, I'm at an exception, or maybe I need to fix something. I don't have time to go do it. What I can do is just create a bug or a work item. If you're integrated into into Azure DevOps or GitHub, you can create an issuing in GitHub or a work item in DevOps right from the tool. So very nice there. Now, how about after the app's running or in the operation phase now? So how do I get it out there? You'll want to set up a pipeline. I'm a big fan of automation. CI/CD pipelines or GitHub Actions, depends on what your flavor is. And there's some actions there to set up deployments. And what happens when a app is deployed into Azure, it'll put in markers. Think of a deck of cards and you're inserting a card in the middle of this deck. This gives you start and stops for the data. It's that kind of in between deployments. Very important to know. In case you're testing, maybe a last deployment was better than the first deployment or whatnot, you can go back and look at that. You can also set up quality gates. If you're using Azure DevOps, there's such a thing as quality gates in the release pipelines to kind of a pre and post approval processes that say, hey, I'm going to deploy this to QA. Maybe I ran some tests. Let's go check those tests out first. And not only is it manual approval, you can set it up to be an automated approval. Those are called quality gates. So be sure to point that out. Monitoring and managing. This is the, again, performance and reliability of the application that's built into the monitor. And code level analysis we talked about before, that's that snapshot debugging and profiling you'll get. Alerts are important. If you can set an alert, maybe if you get too many 401s or 405s or whatnot, you could actually set an alert for that and have it send it to you. And of course, it wouldn't be DevOps if we didn't continuously collect this data and pour it back into our learnings, right? This is right here, plan, track, triage, put it back in, fix things and develop and move forward. So, all right, I'll pause there before I jump into some demos. We'll walk through some of these things just to have some fun now. Any questions I have not monitored if there's a chat window. I'm not even sure where that's at. Oh, I see it. Okay.
There's no questions in chat, but I do have a verbal question for you. So as far as deployment, what if you're utilizing Entity Framework code first? You do a deployment and you update the database and things don't go as planned. Can you automate the backtrack to a previous version in both the code as well as Entity Framework?
Well, Sam, that's always a good question. It's always a kind of an industry struggle. I could tell you how Microsoft does it.
Sure.
There is no rollback. They always deploy database changes. In fact, the app I have, it has databases in it. We can jump around and show you that. But the way Microsoft does this is they always make sure the database supports 2 versions of the application. So if they happen to deploy it and things go bad, it doesn't crash anything. The database continues to run. And then they fix it and they roll it forward. They always roll forward, never back. So they never undo database changes. That's probably the safest way. That's what I've heard from experts out there, that's probably the best way to do it. Make sure your database is resilient and can handle keep old fields, old tables, old columns in databases until you don't need them after 2 versions. A little bit of more maintenance, a little bit of technical debt you collect, but it's worth it.
Yeah, interesting approach.
Yeah, to help?
Oh, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Let's go look at a few things here. Let me just know if you can still see my screen okay. Yeah, you can. I'm going to start this in Visual Studio. This is where we can off-road a little bit. Now, this is a fully built out application already. If I had a brand new app, you create a service or a function or whatnot, the way to start with Application Insights from scratch is just right-click on the actual project if you haven't seen this. Again, the tools are so modern now, it's just so built in. You right-click on the app and you select Application Insight Telemetry. It's right here. And again, it's already installed. What it will do is ask you for, when I say add, it'll ask you for, I'll just go ahead and edit this. If I say edit this dependency, it's going to ask you where in the portal is it? What's your subscription in Azure? You need a subscription. You need a Application Insight instance or create a new one if you don't have one. I could create a new one, give it a name, and give it a data center you want to pick from. What's cool is I'm in Visual Studio and I can pick data centers anywhere in the world to deploy this to. So you think about that from a developer standpoint, it's really, I didn't have to leave and go to the portal, which is pretty cool. So again, this is how I would create a new one. Now I already have it wired up, so I don't need to do that. So we'll get out of that. The other thing I'll show you is if I go here, this is the code lens that you normally see. I don't know if you've ever seen this before, but I don't have any. The reason this isn't collecting data right now is because this is for when you run it locally. So if I were to hit F5 and run this thing locally all the time, I could start collecting real data, requests, exceptions, etc. And that's still sent up to Application Insights. You can see there's a button here, Application Insights. So I can actually jump to that. I can also look at changes in the code and things, but Code Lens is a pretty cool tool that's built in. And again, in the options inside of Visual Studio, you can turn this on and off. So I'm not going to show it to you there. I just wanted to show where it would show up if you were to iterate over the code in here. Now, what I can do is go to View, Other Windows, and you'll notice there's an Application Insights search view that you get within Visual Studio. Visual Studio Code is a little different, but you get that here. And when you click that, you'll get this view here. Now, of course, the first thing you do is go to the upper right corner here and say, hey, what account am I on? Who am I logged into Azure with? What instance do I want to look at? Right, it's going to pull that down. So I wired that up already. And what's cool too is keep in mind this is a moving window of data. Application Insights can collect up to whatever you put your threshold to. I have this running for 3 days, 48 hours, doesn't matter. And then it will show you some information. Even right at the top, it collects it all. I can see how many requests were made to this app, how many custom events. Remember I talked about custom events? Hey, if I click a button, I want to insert a custom event because it normally would not be collected. So that's there. The dependency calls, maybe to SQL or a messaging queue are here. Any exceptions that happen, so I had 22 exceptions in 3 days. Probably not good odds. And then the number of requests. I can also hover over the days here and see how much it was, or what the numbers were on a specific day, like let's say 6/12. Here's one today. This is today's 6/14. So I can see the different number of events going on here as well. Now, I mentioned custom events. Oh, actually, before I jump into that, let's look at any event on this day. Each time you click, of course, it's going to go search these different events. But notice the data you get on the left-hand side. So I can actually see some API name. I can see the version of the application itself. And this is the data that's pulled out of the application Insight monitoring logs. I can see which locations are hitting this application, and so forth and so on. There's just a bunch of information here, right? What countries are hitting it, what cities, what are the result codes I'm getting, and so forth and so on. So it just keeps going. There's a lot of data here. May or may not like to digest it this way, but that's okay. And then, hey, what are the most common operations that people are hitting this with? Looks like home page, exercise, nutrition, etc. are here as well. So what I was going to do is, sorry to jump around like this. I'm going to pull up the app itself. I meant to show you what the app looked like, so my bad. Give me 1 second, I'll find it. Apologies here. Let's see if I can find it real quick. There we go. Nope. Okay, it's gonna be stubborn on me. That's okay. Anyway, so this is the Mercury Health app that running. It's just basically a web app that's collecting some information about nutrition and exercise information. So it's really just a demo app. So that's all I wanted to show you inside of Visual Studio. Well, one more thing. I talked about custom. This is a custom time range. But if I were to say search for something like, let's say I wanted to find, like, I happen to know there's some errors out there looking for wrong keys, custom telemetry, so I can type anything I want in the search box and it'll go out through the data logs and find where those are, the different traces, right? And then I can click on a specific trace and pull up a lot more details about it on the right-hand side here. So I get information about, the number of times it hit. I get some information about what role it was playing, what function, where did it come from? This happened to come from a function app and what SDK version that function app was running. Now that was just one example. I have some automation set up to insert pieces of fruit, like for nutrition value into this app. And I trace it as a custom event. So I could search for apple or pear or banana. Let's just try that. And it will come back and show me when and where something with the word banana was inserted. Again, on the right-hand side, it shows me a lot more information. Here's the function it was at when it happened. Now, this is not an error, this is just data. So again, depending on what you're looking for, you may collect certain maybe user functions or whatnot. So, okay, that's all I really wanted to show you inside of Visual Studio. We can always jump back if we need to. I'll keep that open. The other thing I was going to run is the app itself. Let me go back into the app. I don't know why that didn't start, but it should have started for us. So let me just try it one more time. Did everybody say yay? Here we go. Okay. This is the app. It's just a website. And it basically has some functionality for inserting nutrition records in a SQL database and also exercise information. Very simple. So this is the application insight data we're collecting. And there's a bunch of API calls, et cetera, that happen here. So let's go into application insights itself. First thing I want to show you is the dashboard. We talked about this in the slides that you can actually set up a dashboard to monitor your application. Let me go full screen here. I hope that resolution's okay, Sam. I didn't even check with you.
Yeah, it looks good.
Okay, awesome. So when you deploy an app, you can set up a dashboard like this inside of Azure, right? And it gives me some usage information. Now, this is not a heavily used application at all. I get, again, at the very top is the time frame of data. How much data do you want to look at? I get availability 100%. There's 5 streams of data. Reliability information, number of failures I get here, 14. Response time is 319 milliseconds. That's not too bad. And then just other information that's sitting here. It depends on what the app is, but my availability is 100%, which is awesome. Considering no one's using it, I think that's awesome. So this is the dashboard you set up, and at any point I can just jump in. But now I have the other blade open here. So again, application insights. If I actually get to the application insight blade here, let me do that. I could probably zoom in a little more now, but Just let me know if this resolution's too low. This is the application insight dashboard that the data goes to, and it's very important when you're in the application to set this up. It has to know what instance to send it to, and it does it through this instrumentation key. And again, that's just part of the wiring. When I right-click and say, hey, add application insights, it does that automatically. I don't have to do anything for it. If I'm running an app, a web app, it needs to know, it's configured that way to write it to this. So it just knows how to do that. So if you want to, we can dig into that if we need to. But so this is just the dashboard. I can look at the, again, I can go time window here and give me some basic information. But the power here is coming down into the investigate area. So different hats. As a developer, I can start investigating my availability of the app, my failure of the app, what's the performance look like. I can look at smart detection. So I can set up a smart detection to say, hey, if this app service is 85% or higher, and it happens too often, let me know and send me an alert. So I can set up alerts right here. The application map is probably the best place to start. This is the graphical view of what the app looks like. And I'm gonna go ahead and grab 24 hours. And as you pick and choose, the map moves, changes. You can tell it to exclude 404s or 400 type exceptions. I'll leave that on. Also, a couple little GUI options that are fun to have here. I can actually put this in a layout like this. This is more the flow data, I like it. Or you can put it into more of this hub and spoke model. So it just depends on what you like. So let me go back here. So again, what this is showing me is a lot of information already. I can see that there's this function app. It fails less than 1% of the time out of 1.7 thousand calls. It's calling into an API layer of the app, again, failing 1% of the time, or actually 0.3%. And that's out of 3.5 thousand calls. That's what's going on here. Same thing with the API is calling into this is the app service now. 39,000 calls, 90,000 or 90 of them come from here, 17 from here. You can just kind of follow this around. The app itself relies on a SQL database in the backend, configuration management here as well. So you get a nice view of the map itself. What's cool though is I can come in and say, what's failing here? This red's not good. Red's never good, right? I can click on the red and it'll open up a blade on the right-hand side, and it shows me the top failing codes here, and also the slowest performing calls here as well. Because it's red, I selected red. I'm investigating failures or exceptions here. So I can see I have 3 502s in 24 hours. I can also just click off it, that blade goes away. I can come back in here and click on the actual app service itself. And now I'm getting the slowest performance, right? We always want to investigate slow things in performance monitoring. I can also look at the database calls itself. How long are those taking? Is the delay in my app or is the delay in the database layer? I can drill into that. Each one of these I can investigate performance, just keep that in mind. I'll drill into that in just a minute. So that is the application map itself. And again, I can zoom in and out of anywhere I want on this map. So it's a great place to start. Smart detection I did not set up, but this is where you can set up alerts based on what's going on in the application. Live metrics, I should have had this running already. It takes about 10 seconds to get it going. Live metrics is something that, for an instance, the Azure DevOps team has a team room and they have a large monitor up on their wall watching the usage of Azure DevOps itself. So they monitor Azure DevOps with Application Insights, and they get data like this. You'll notice some dependency calls here. Failed requests are here. You'll see on the right-hand side the telemetry that's coming in. Now, again, this app is not used very often. It's used by very infrequently, but used enough to see something coming in here. Also, notice at the bottom, you get some instances that are running because it's a serverless application. So I can actually see how many and where that instances are living or what services they're running on. I was hoping that it would throw an error here for you. You can actually see what that looks like. What's cool is if there is an error or a failure of some sort, it'll jump up and show up in here and it'll turn red. So I'll just give that another couple seconds. If nothing happens, we'll continue. You can see here's an event right in the middle where my cursor is. Notice that says track event. That's a custom event that I put in. The word trace is just built into the product. Events are custom events. In fact, you can see it says that the API updated record number 25 to banana. So that's some of that custom telemetry I mentioned. Okay, it's not going to throw anything, so we're going to move on here. Left-hand side, search transactions. So you remember in Visual Studio, I could bring up my view and look at data. We go 3 days here. I could look and search for whatever I wanted. If I was looking for exceptions or errors, I could look for the word exception. This is, again, as a developer, I can come in and look for specific things and see where those exceptions are. So it tells me how many exceptions I have at what time of day on what day. I can also look here and see, oh, this exception was at today, actually at 3:08, just over 3 hours ago. And looks like it's having some problem, wrong key under, so I could actually click into that exception and get a little more information. And I'm feeling like this is too small. Let me go like this. So I get a little more information about that exception. Let me close that and go back. Let me clear this. I can look for the word keys. Maybe I'm looking for the word key in these. I could actually look for the custom ones we talked about. I don't know if I have any apples in here. Let's see, probably not. Nope, how about banana? That one always works. So again, depending on what you're tracking or looking for, you can very easily find it here. Just keep that in mind. Now, I'm not having any filters here. I have it for 3 days. It's a lot of data, as you can see. This is what I showed you in Visual Studio. What's cool, this is just a chronological list of things that happened. I could also hit the group button. So group results is a little nicer to see, what the highest percentages of these trace functions or requests or custom events. So 57% of these events are here out of the calls. And then of course, 12 of them have common errors and properties, etc. So this is the transaction search that you can actually slice and dice and go starting looking as well. I'm going to show you this at another point, but notice there's sliders on these data. There's a lot going on here. If I wanted to zoom into Tuesday, let's say Tuesday the 13th at 6 a.m., I could just click on it, but that's just one day. What's nice is I could grab the sliders on the bottom here and put that slider there, and then I can grab this slider and put it over here, and then I can start zooming into the data a little deeper. Just trims the noise off both ends, basically what it's doing. So sliders are pretty fun to play with. Let's talk about availability. So again, this is hey, this app have a heartbeat? Is it up and running? And I'm going to put this on scatter plot. Same thing, 3 days, 3 days. And not only is it running, how long does it take to ping, basically? And you give it, so what I could do is come out here and say, hey, I want to set up a new standard test. I'll give it a name, I give it a URL. I can tell it how many times to hit it. What this is doing is, and then testing locations. What this is doing is you can pick the data centers that you want this. So if you want to see this, if this application is available from Europe, I can just pick one of the Europe data centers, or from Japan, or from Brazil or Australia, depending on what your use case is. This will just built into Azure, it will ping the application from these locations, and you'll be able to track how long they take. I could also, you can see here, like let's say my exercise page. I have it being pinged from these 5 locations. Obviously, everything's working great. There's no problem there or delay. It tells me how long it takes. And that's what this on the scatter block here. I was hoping to have some failures, but clearly not a good demo for tonight. Let's try 7 days. Nope.
A question,
well,
Randy.
Yep.
Can this data be exported into like an Excel spreadsheet so that you could do some analytics on it?
You can export it, yeah. I'll make sure I show you that at the end, Sam. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. So there is some failures here, as you can see. If the idea is I can actually click on one of these boxes here, that was a bad one. Or I can click on a performance dot. These are all just dots. And the idea is to show me the call for that dot, right? This came from Japan, data center. So at any point in time, I can just jump into the data. I'm going to show you a different area here, but this is called availability tests. Again, they're just ping tests. And each one you jump into a report as well. I like the scatter chart better than the line chart, but line chart you can see is here, but it's not working for me tonight. What's going on here? So let's look at failures. Again, you want to know if your app's running or not running. Same thing here. I can go and say 24 hours. I'll say 3 days. The reason I'm saying 3 days is I could just deploy this. I want to keep it kind of tight on the data. A couple things, a lot going on here as well. Let's look at this. You have the sliders at the bottom. Sliders, again, let you zoom into the data so I can see a spike here of failures. I have the top 3 codes on the right, so I have 12 401s. Not sure what these other ones are. It's kind of nuts. I've not seen those before. I also have exception keys. I have subscription keys invalids. I have some invalid operations and then HTTP exceptions here as well. Now, again, as a developer, you only have so much time to debug things. And I personally would start at the 12. The biggest bang for the buck, let's fix these first. The other thing I wanted to point out was because of the integration with either GitHub Actions or Azure DevOps CI/CD pipelines, you notice these tick marks here. These are the deployment, release deployments that happened and where they came from and when they happened. So every time you're deploying code, it puts a marker into the data. And that's what these tick marks are. So now I can see that, oh, this was a GitHub pipeline that it happened and came from deployment on this day, this time, etc. So tick marks are important. I can also look at dependencies. So operations are happening to the app level. Dependencies of the apps depending on something to happen, like an API call or a database call or something like that. And then, of course, I can scroll down a little bit here at the bottom and see those calls in the most failed first. So this API call here, I can click on it, and I can see that it's causing 401s. And I can see that it happens kind of on a regular increment. Now, I could drill into the 8. There's just a bunch of ways to do this. I could drill into the 8, the 401. What I like to do is drill into the samples at the bottom. This is one of those things, if you don't have a lot of time to debug, the suggested one is most common. It's using some machine learning on the back end here to say, hey, out of your X number of transactions, this happens the most. Start here first. And then I can click on that. And this pulls up an end-to-end transaction that shows me that this function started here, called API management. API had some problem, couldn't get into the data to the application, and it ended up with an exception. And this exception is access denied. Somebody tried to call this application, didn't pass the correct subscription key, and it failed. Now, Application Insights, of course, collects that information. So that's probably a simple one. It's not a coding problem, it's a security issue, but it caught it. Now, one of the other integration points I wanted to mention was whether you're using GitHub or DevOps, it doesn't matter, is I could come up here and say, create a work item. This is true, by the way, anywhere in Application Insights. I could do this for performance or errors. I don't have this wired up to Azure DevOps. As I said, I was having an issue with my DevOps account for the moment. So I'm going to say GitHub issues, and it'll say, do you want to create an issue inside of GitHub for this? Yes, I do. And it will create that issue for me under the actual repo that it's in, and it's an issue. So if you're familiar with DevOps work items, it would be a work item over there. And I can say submit the issue. Great, now I can go to the issues and start, working on these issues that I have a list of issues here with different things to work on. So let's go back. So that's one thing I wanted to show you. If I go back to, let's hide that. The exception blade, again, shows you the most common exceptions here. Subscription key was by far the most common. So again, this is all data presented to you in a much easier to digest format, depending on what you're looking for, operations and so forth. These are all obviously, here's actually a database call, update nutrition record. Request was bad. So let me click into that and see what that looks like. Okay, that'll just take us down the same path. Let's go back. Oops. Sorry, I went too far. The other thing, let's kind of move off of exceptions and whatnot. Let's look at performance. So the app maybe not is running well, or maybe it's not running well. Same thing, 3 days. It would be nice in the UI if it remembered the chunk of time that I selected. Now, another thing that kind of bugs me, but is the percentage range here. I always go by the 95th percentile of calls. Gives you kind of a true meaning or a true view of the data. Notice when I deploy, same thing with the deployment markers here, the annotations, is the app spikes up when that happens. And then it goes back down and spikes up again. So that's just an interesting pattern. Also, it shows me my spikes when I'm looking at the duration of the deployment as well on the right. Right in the center at the bottom is the actual calls themselves. So the home page, of course, takes the longest. But let's say I'm looking at let's say I'm inserting a nutrition record here. Same thing, it happened 8 times. I would do the same sort of thing. I would go down this path and click on that. It shows me some data. Why did, 4.6 seconds may not be a long time, but in this particular case it is. And then I would do the same thing. I would click on samples and pick the most common sample, which would be at the top. And let me look at this. So again, this walks down on the left, the end-to-end transaction here, and it goes to the back end, etc. I was hoping to have a coding problem or a coding issue to show you, but I don't have one in front of me. But this basically gives you the name of the SQL server that's going to and what, how long it took. So you can kind of trace this back to, hey, did the call to the database take a long time, or did the app take a long time? You can see right here, it called it. It took 42 milliseconds to call the API. And then there's the actual call itself. Now, if you work in C# code, there's another button here that says show me my code only. I was trying to find that to show that to you, but I don't have one readily available. So that's performance. Performance is another important piece here. Let me go back. The other things stay the same as far as these bars and whatnot. And of course, at the top here, you'll see analyzing workbooks. I'm going to show you workbooks in just a minute here, so we'll save that for just a minute. But that's pretty much around the UI, and dependencies is the same thing. It's, hey, I'm looking at performance issues with these dependencies. So these are kind of the 3 favorites here, is that performance, failures, and the application map is a great place to start. Now let's just jump down and let's go down a little bit on the blade itself into the alerts. This is where I can set up an alert. I can say create an alert, maybe create a rule, something's performing over 80%, send me an alert, send me an email, send me a text. This is where I set those alerts up. I did not have any set up, but that's where that would be happening right there. And then metrics is another way just to drill in. You can actually say, show me availability here and show me it on average. I can change the line chart to an area chart. This is the 100%, that doesn't really help, but what's cool is I can add another metric on top of this. So I can say, wrong key count. And I get wrong key count, which is, I need a bigger window of data, don't I? I'm going to change this to 3 days again. This is the type of thing you can create when you add a new metric. And you can pick this long list of metrics that come out of the data. So depending on what you're looking for, response request size, maybe that doesn't make sense. But the point is you can actually start making these graphs. And if you like the graph, then you can say, hey, cool, let's save that or pin it to the dashboard. You saw the dashboard that I started with. That's how these are built. They're built this way. Now, granted, I automated all that, but you can actually build this one by one if you wanted to. So that's the metrics piece. The workbooks, I wanted to just touch on that. These are the pre-canned reports. So if your boss says, hey, I need a report every month on the number of failures, or hey, how's our performance going on the application? You could write the report or just click one of these buttons and say, I'm going to show you my failure analysis report. Again, built in 4 hours. Let's go change this to 3 days. This is the failure analysis report. The highest count failures come from this API call into exercises and nutrition and exercises, specific record numbers and so forth and so on, and it goes down. So how nice and easy that was to build, right? Then there's the put statements. And then there's top exceptions and codes. The point of this is that these workbooks are canned workbooks that are sitting on top of the data, so I don't have to create them myself. Other workbooks. Other workbooks are, that's a popular one, failure analysis one, performance analysis. We know what that's going to look like, right? Performing applications as well, so it's very similar. Depending on what your application components are made of, it'll show up on this report. So that's another cool workbook. I won't go into the rest of this for now, but as you can see, you just kind of explore and play around with these as well. I'm going to show you active users as well. So the other piece of Application Insights is not just investigation on exceptions or failures or performance issues, is usage. How do we know, we delivered value with DevOps? Now you have to use your imagination with me tonight, because there's no users of this application really. It's kind of bot driven, if you will. But as you can imagine, this will show you the number of users. I have some of this in the slide deck I'll show you. We have the number of users here. I can actually say I want more insights on the user. So who's using my app? What browser are they using? Where are they coming from? What operating system are they coming from? That type of information gives me idea of the number of users and where they're coming from. So this is a boring chart because there's only one user. But all the controls work the same. I can slice and dice the data. Same thing for sessions. Again, there's not a lot of data to show you with the sessions because this app isn't really used. Let's just, again, I have this in a slide deck, so I'll show that to you there. User flow, same thing in the slide deck, but this is about the path that's taken. So what I can say is, hey, show me an event that starts with a home page over the last 7 days, and all the different sessions that somebody took, and create a graph for it. So what it will do is build a graph of the path someone took through your application like this, which if you think about it, that's pretty slick to have. I can say there's only so many sessions that this session here at this very start, 4,400 sessions started here. Each one of those sessions click on the home page, and most of those sessions went up to a SQL call. Some of those went down to configuration, and out of those and so forth and so on, it keeps on working itself through left to right on the flow of data. So it gives you some more insight to how the app's used. Again, if it was a user, you'd see a user here and it'd see how that person goes through the app here. Let's talk about configuring this, because we talked about data. So let's look at a couple things, and one of them Sam asked about. So this is the smart detection settings that I can actually load and configure. Slow page performance, degrading response times. Hey, my response time has always been over 90%, and now all of a sudden it's dropped. So why? So we can set those up. Usage. This is a biggie because this hits the pocketbook. And I told you I'd show you this. So this is how much are things costing. So we'll just hit the data sampling. Now I have this thing cranked up. Every single transaction is collecting 100% of the telemetry. But again, to save money, let's say the app's running normally, just crank it down to 50%. You collect half the data, half the storage, half the cost. So you can see you can play around with that. The other thing is that you can do a daily cap. So how many gigabytes of data do you want to collect, right? Things are charged, Azure charges by storage data. And give me a warning at 90% or 60%. Make this 20 gig. So you have control over that as well. So between those two things, you can control costs. I wanted to show you the export template, and then I'm just going to show you, not the template, sorry, wrong spot. Sam, I'm trying to find out where they might have moved it on me. There's a spot somewhere to configure this to export data. So we'll have to circle back on that one.
Yeah, no problem.
I thought it was right. They must have moved. It was right here. They moved it and didn't ask, right?
Never happened before.
Right. One thing, I don't know if anybody's interested in cost, but if you are, I can show you some cost analysis that is available in Azure. But let's go back to some slides for a minute. I think there's any questions before I leave the UI? If not, I'll jump back to slides. Let's do that. I have a few things I'll show you in the slide itself. Just to kind of recap and put it all together, one big picture is, think of Application Insights. Recap is the big picture itself is collecting metrics, the dashboards I showed you, some of the alert notifications you have. Synthetic monitoring is the ping, the availability test you can actually hook up. If you want to watch your app live streams available as well. And then application map. So draw out the connections and how the different components are connected. And it's real time, so it's connected. The workbooks are just canned reports for you. And then DevOps integration, which is showing you those markers, those annotations that get inserted into the data. I can show you inside of a DevOps pipeline what that actually looks like if anybody's interested. If not, we'll just save it for the slides. I have a few slides I'll jump over to and skip some of this stuff. The fixing problems is a biggie, finding and fixing, right? Smart detection, there's the end-to-end traceabilities, there's the failure diagnostics you get by clicking into the most common or samples you get. You can look at it from Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code, Code Lens. There's just a few ways, a few ways to do that as well. And then profiling, I didn't quite show you that. I did forget to show you that. The profiling piece, I'll show you that in just a second. And the monitoring, the funnels, the usage, etc., user flows, all that is part of the usage that you can actually look to see who's using what, where, and when. The one thing I wanted to show you, I did sort of skip over accidentally, is if I go into, if I'm back into a error, let's say invalid operation, let's just grab that one. Usually it pops up and says snapshot debugging. I guess I won't be able to show you. Usually it shows it here. I have to be inside some sort of C# code for that to actually happen. Normally it would pop up here and said, hey, do you want to profile this? This code is, let's say performance monitoring here. If I wanted to say, insert this record, performance profiling, right at the very top here, you'll see it's kind of subtle, but it's called the profiler button. This is if, hey, I have a bug that happens every once in a while, it kind of spikes. It's hard to trace down, it's hard to chase down this bug. I can say, hey, I don't need this on all the time because it impacts performance, but I can say profile it now. And you'll see the profile in your upper right-hand corner. It'll start up, it'll run, and then put that, we come back later, it'll put a nice file here with all the profile collected data for a time window. So just know that I can just profile it. I like to do this on the fly or on per request, if you will. And then I can pull that. I can actually look at that inside of the portal or pull it down into Visual Studio. So that's the only thing I forgot to show you. So we'll go back. Okay. There's a couple of resources and links here for learning more, Visual Studio learning more, monitoring, DevOps, etc. It's all in here. I had a couple of fun slides I wanted to put together. A, in case the demos didn't work, but B, they're in the slide deck for you to take and look at if you want. Sorry. This is the user flow for a different application. This is using a large set of data for this application. But the idea is you can take a step back and see the usage flow. So if you built some feature that's down here and you're deploying it and nobody's using it, that's back to that DevOps is what value is being added. Well, only 3 people used it. So that's you could use that for that type of thing. But if you look at this, session is kind of fun to look at that way. The other thing I showed you that I didn't have a lot of data for is the users. So this app has 6,000 users in it. You can see at the very bottom, we can categorize that by the country they're coming from. Again, slice and dice it. I can categorize it by the country, by the city, by the state, by the IP, by data about what kind of browsers are hitting my app, what operating system's hitting it, what's the top most performing cities, etc. So this data is pretty fun to collect as well. Another piece is the live metrics that didn't kind of throw any errors when I was showing it to you, but this is what it would look like. On the right-hand side, you see the telemetry dependencies pop up in red. Again, you can click them right away, or they just get logged. It doesn't matter. But it gives you an idea of the health of the app. Usually I try to avoid red spikes. And then the application map, again, just there for context, but this shows you a little more complicated applications, and the performance. The thing I do is I go and look for red right away. And another screenshot of what it looks like in Visual Studios here for you. And then the transaction search, I put that in here as well. A slide for failures, what the failures look like. And then the markers for the release annotations in case you're thinking about this later. And then snapshot debuggings here as well. This is inside the portal. This is what it would have looked like if I would have said, hey, I have a C# app that's blowing up on such and such a line. I can get a snapshot debugging right in the portal. And if you really want to pull it down to Visual Studio, you'll see in the right corner, you do need Visual Studio Enterprise. It's the higher end SKU to pull that down. And then performance, again, it's lather, rinse, repeat. It's very similar to the UI as the failures here, but release annotations are important as well. And let's see, what other goodies do I have here? The profiler. This is what a profiler dump looks like. I started the profiler, but it takes 18 minutes to do it, right? Once you get one of those, I can go in here and look at things like this, the hot path of the app, the slowest performing parts. How long is that app waiting? How long is the call to SQL waiting? How long is that method call waiting? I can get all that from this data. So it's a wealth of information about the app's performance. Jumping over to CI/CD, this is what it looks like for the release of this application. So it's very simple. It just released a dev and to a staging area, and then it goes into a pre-approval gate, which is what this is. So somebody has to manually approve that. There's also such a thing as called quality gates, and the quality gates can be an automatic releases of the software. It can actually check to make sure the app service is up, make sure SQL's up, make sure there's communications, make sure there's not delays, etc. And that's what these checks on the lower right are, lower left. So I could set these little checks up. Most common probably are Azure alerts. So I can check on any Azure service I want. I could hit any point in my app with a REST endpoint, and whatever results come back, I could determine whether I should proceed forward or not. And then there's procedure, these checks to deploy to production. You can actually have it manually approval process here. So this is that same application and a slightly different way to deploy it. So this is just your typical, build and deploy the infrastructure first, run some UI test, sprinkle in some load tests, and then we deploy it. So that's it. I think I covered everything I wanted to show you guys tonight, and probably a little more. So I will open it up for any questions or comments. Was this good, bad, or we use it already, or I wish I could use it, or anybody working in Azure today? Or I'm going to go through the IAM real quick here. Edward's asking, is it possible to configure the alerts and notifications to send emails and or texts? Yeah, I already answered that. Yep. Yes, it is. I used to get them all the time when I do these demos, and I got too many emails, so I turned it off. But you can do that, yeah. Yep. Okay.
Excellent job, Randy. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. Thank you, and thank you everybody for. Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you all for taking the time to join this tonight. Appreciate it.
All right, so as far as resources, the presentation is being recorded and it will be edited in a couple of days and then uploaded to YouTube. So if you'll please subscribe to the channel to get the upload notifications. The link for everything regarding the resources is posted in the chat window currently, so feel free to grab those and bookmark them. In addition, tech events are also posted on my blog, samnasser.blogspot.com, and you can also subscribe to that to get updates. And last but certainly not least, the feedback eval. The link is also posted in chat, as you might have guessed. So feel free to click on those and fill those out so we can provide Randy with some constructive criticism. Also, if you joined us after the start of the meeting, a special offer from Randy.com with a 35% off a selection of books. And the link, again, as you might have guessed, is also posted in chat. And one of the things that we always like to cover are job openings. So you can find a variety of jobs available at techsystems.com/IT-jobs, but also like to ask the audience who's hiring and who's looking for work. If you would please, if you have any job postings at your place of employment, put those in the chat. Likewise, if you're looking to change your place of employment, feel free to make yourself known, or you can email me afterwards. And speaking of which, my contact information, snasser@nistechnologies.com. You can also find me on Twitter at samnasser. My blog, samnasser.blogspot.com. And lastly, if we're not connected on LinkedIn, I invite you to do so. And with that, thank you all for attending, and a big thank you to Randy for taking the time to present. Highly appreciate your time. So thank you, everyone. Good night, and we'll see you next month.